My name's Daniel Elias Froggett, past master of Alexandria-Washington Lodge number 22 in 2020. Before I was a Mason, immediately before I was a Mason, I was working at George Washington's Mount Vernon as their event planner and had to deal with these old men that would show up twice a year and want to drive their cars on the estate to lay a wreath at Washington's tomb. And it took me a while to connect the dots and realize that they were Masons, and my grandfather is currently still a Mason, and so little by little I got to know them. Frank Dunaway, who's a past master of this lodge, was my main contact. He used to organize most of the wreath layings during those days, and so one thing led to another and I became a Mason. But prior to that, I was just fresh out of college, came to DC and worked for the government for a little while, then worked at Mount Vernon for a little while. Well, along with the wreath layings that AW would do at Mount Vernon, occasionally they would have dinners or things. And Washington's birthday, I think it fell on a Saturday. It was 2000. I was raised in 2007, so it would have been February of 2007. They had a special meeting at Mount Vernon. The typical George Washington's birthday stated communication was held in one of the conference rooms at Mount Vernon instead of being held here at the memorial. So it was my job to set everything up for them. I'm like, they need how many tables for what? I didn't understand any of it. And I came around the corner to check on the group to make sure that they were okay. And Dimitar Mavrov is standing there with a sword. And I'm like, I'm sorry, what are you doing? So we joked about that. That was my first encounter with him, and we've joked about it ever since. So it was bizarre to have someone standing in the middle of the administration building at Mount Vernon with a sword and stopping me from going into a room that I had jurisdiction over, not him. So it was funny. But I relented and didn't try and bust up in the room. He didn't have to stab me with the sword or anything. So. Well, my Masonic journey began in 2007. I got to know Frank Dunaway, and he kind of introduced me to a few things. The executive director at Mount Vernon at the time, Jim Reese, who was a member of this lodge, he's since passed away, but he talked to me a little bit, and I also talked to my grandfather and to one of our neighbors at home who I consider an uncle, who they're both Masons. So they were the signers on my petition. Jim Reese was very angry that I didn't ask him to be a signer on my petition. He's like, you're petitioning the lodge I'm a member of. And I'm like, Jim, you're not my father or my uncle, so get over yourself. But I went through the first 2 degrees with a group of guys, and Nestor Villanueva is the only one that I remember. He's still a member here. I know that there were others. I didn't commit to memory who they were. But I asked for a special date for my raising because I wanted my grandfather to be here. So my grandparents and my mom and Rodney and Anna came up for my raising, and that was on November 17th of 2007. So that was special for me to have them here for that. And then the early days, I just didn't understand why our meetings were so long. Like, you would sit here, there'd be so many things, and we teach everyone that everyone's on the level when you're in a Masonic lodge, so every opinion matters. And there were a few instances when maybe I spoke and some of the older members were like, why is this new kid speaking? Stuff I knew about, so I spoke about it. Y'all know me, I don't really ever stop talking, so of course I had to get my 2 cents in. That was interesting. AW was going through an interesting transition at that time. I learned my catechisms in Frank Dunaway's library at his place in Skyline Drive. And then not Skyline Drive, Skyline Apartments, whatever, they're off above the Target now. He and his wife eventually moved to Florida, and I continued to come to lodge at AW22, but it was obvious I was not going to be in a leadership position. So I started exploring other lodges. My first thing was to become the district blood coordinator, which was just an opportunity to get to know other people outside the lodge. And it was the year that Ben Browning, who's also a member of this lodge, was district deputy grand master. And we attempted to have a big blood drive here at the memorial, but that didn't work out for various reasons. And I got to know all the other lodges in the district, and there were 5 at that time. Henry Knox Field Lodge, number 349, John Blair Lodge, number 187, and then Andrew Jackson and AW here in this building, and then the Research Lodge. The Research Lodge is now considered in a different district, but it still meets in this building. But I started to go to Lodge at John Blair and get to know those guys, and just thought that it was a really nice group of people. They were enjoyable to sit and have Lodge with, and it was not as formal a Lodge as AW, so it's kind of nice to, I'm an Episcopalian, so it's nice to have high church and low church, so I consider John Blair low church, and I've told them this, I don't think it's an insult, it's just a different experience. So I started going there, and then I affiliated with them, and they put me in line, and that's where I first became master in 2017. And the trustees had told me going into it, your job is to consolidate this lodge with Henry Knox Field. So I spent a year consolidating lodges, which you learn a lot about the Methodical Digest. You learn a lot about how mean old people can be when they don't want to see change happen. You learn a lot about a lot of things. And you know, I really don't care most of the time when people are yelling at me, so I just trudged forward. We got it done, and Henry Knox Field John Blair Lodge, I stayed on as master in 2018. So we created a strong lodge, and I was very proud of the work that we did there. And the guys have kept it going. I'm now secretary of that lodge, and we keep things rolling right along. It was shortly after that that the interesting times here at AW took place. So when our charter was returned, I was put in as junior steward and miraculously rocketed through every seat in the lodge. And the only one I wasn't elected into was junior warden, but I sat in that chair for about 2 months. So eventually, 2019 came around, and we had stabilized the line. Nick was in the east, and I was in the west, and then I moved to the east here in 2020. So my year as master was interesting, to say the least. I mean, I went into it with big plans. I published a book, which it was a little pamphlet, but shiny, gloss paper and magazine style, with my full program of work, and the goal was to be somewhat intellectual and think outside the Masonic box. Every presentation doesn't have to be done about what this symbol means. We can explore other avenues that Masonry can be applicable in our lives. And that was the goal. Go into it, make it a big year, make it a year where people felt like they could identify various things that made Masonry relevant in their lives that wasn't necessarily specifically Masonry. So my theme was Ad Manis Bodum, which is for the greater good in Latin, because, we like to put things in Latin here at AW. So my symbol was a honeybee, and we launched the year thinking it was going to be fantastic. My parents came in, my sister flew in from Canada for my installation, and I always feel bad saying my installation because all the officers are installed, but you'll note in the installation ceremony that they spend a half hour on the master and like 2 seconds on every other officer, so it's the master's installation, it's all about them. But it was, that was an awesome ceremony. We had a great turnout, and it was beautiful in the theater here in the memorial. And then, you go immediately from installation into thinking about nothing but George Washington's birthday in this lodge. So by February 22nd, which fell on a Saturday, it was awesome. We were able to sort of align with the memorial on some of our activities, and we had a beautiful day. And it's rare that we have a beautiful day for the birthday, but it wasn't too cold. I mean, I was glad I had on all my layers, but it wasn't too cold, and it was sunny, and there were 100 people at the wreath-laying ceremony at Mount Vernon, which is just unusual for us. We'll get 40 or 50, but it was a huge crowd, and I didn't know that I expected that, and it was great. While I was giving my presentation right before I laid my wreath, I was talking about George Washington, and I always think that people love to refer to Washington the General and Washington the Mason, and Washington was really just this kind of interesting guy. He was very type A, but at the same time he had a little bit of a jokester in him, and random things made him happy that make him so much more human than when we put out the General and the Mason. Washington loved ice cream. But as I was saying things like that, this flock of geese fly over and make a horrible noise, because at Mount Vernon there's always geese flying over something, and so I was able to work into the speech that Washington loved geese, and it was, a random laugh, and what should have probably been an extremely solemn ceremony, but most people that know me know that there's always going to be a laugh somewhere involved. It's not always going to be funny. But we had our March stated communication, and during the March stated communication, we'd started to hear rumblings about COVID-19 and how it was going to start to impact us and how things were going to shut down. And it was the next day that my offices at the State Department decided that they would close the following Monday, and it was that following Monday that the Grand Lodge issued its orders that we shut down all meetings. So my year was mostly online. We did a lot of Zoom meetings. I was really proud of the guys for, adapting in the weirdest time and jumping on Zoom. And we had guys that you would never think would get on a Zoom call, jump on a Zoom call, and we were able to continue with the program of work. We still had our speakers. All the authors that I had invited to speak participated with us, and then even when we were able to come back to the lodge in a limited capacity to truly have the number of members that we have attend meetings, we still had the Zoom component, so our meetings were open and people could still participate and do so safely. And it was a challenge, but with the exception of not getting to have the St. John's Day dinner, which is one of my favorite events that the lodge has, my year was really not that bad. It was a challenge, yes. We had to figure a lot of things out. We were not as ritual proficient as we should have been because we couldn't get together to practice ritual. But outside of that, we were able to do many things, and we were able to get the foundation fully operational and fully 501c3 nonprofit status, and that was a significant accomplishment. And we were able to do many things that maybe we would have been distracted from doing had we not had COVID to give us the time to sit around and just focus on X. And we still made 12 Master Masons at the one-day conferral that was held in, October and November. So, AW's always had a very strong membership number year after year, and I was afraid my year was not going to have that number. But we were fortunate that we were able to keep everybody engaged enough to go through that process. And then I spent, a good deal of time working with all the guys that went through the one day on their catechism pieces parts that they had to learn. And thanks to everybody that's here helping film this, that you all helped me get across the finish line with the guys. So we accomplished a lot for 2020. Did we accomplish it the way I wanted to? No. Did we get to have all the fancy sort of pomp and circumstance that I love? No. But I think that we came out of the year in a good place, and we were in a very good place financially. So we got to focus on the gift shop and start developing new products for the gift shop. And it's been, as you look back in retrospect, yes, I wish that I could have had a normal year just so that I could do all the things that I wanted to do. But by and large, we were able to move the lodge forward, and that's really what was most important. Did my theme align with 2020? For the greater good aligns with Masonry in general, and I think that taking that broader approach to Masonry and realizing that it impacts things well beyond what we consider it's impacting, that does sort of reach into the realm of for the greater good. So if folks thought a little bit more during the past year about how they were interacting with their fellow humans, because it's been challenging, some folks didn't want to wear a mask. Having that interaction and, regardless of which side that you're on, we went through a very, very tumultuous presidential campaign last year, and Masons are regularly challenged at being able to subdue their passions when it comes to political flares. And so I hope that for the greater good may have given folks some context and helped them better cope with what was in front of them. I don't know. George Washington's legacy at AW22 is important for a number of reasons. I mean, Washington as a Mason sort of solidifies the importance of Freemasonry in the United States. If it's an organization that the first leader of our country thought was important, then I think that it gives us the credentials that we need to have a platform for the work that we do. Washington here at AW22, did Washington attend that many meetings? No, but he did correspond with us frequently. And when he died, there were things from his estate that were given to the lodge, and there was always a relationship with the lodge. Washington was very firm on the community being sort of the cornerstone of how the American experiment was going to work. So that's why he was an active participant in his community. And I think that the lessons that Washington taught by example to the members of our lodge have been perpetuated over the years. Generosity to the community through donations to the firehouse. He built one of the first firehouses in Alexandria and one of the first schools that was open to poor children. You know, Washington's work in the churches, everything that he did in the community was also kind of Masonic at the same time. So Washington's legacy is important because he allowed AW to put their name on it. And that has made our lodge historically important. And that's given us a platform to maintain a certain level of proficiency in ritual and then encourage other lodges to do the same. We're able to strengthen the craft in total because we have a strong lodge ourselves. And our lodge remains strong because we have constant membership coming in, thanks to our history, if nothing else. And then, you know, the members here have engaged those new people and keep them going. And so it's sort of a self-perpetuating story that I don't think we could have without Washington. We would be an important lodge, I think. I think that we would be a strong lodge and we would still be open after 240 years. But I think that Washington being a part of it sort of gave us all a responsibility to ensure the lodge remained open and to ensure that we were kind of the shining little temple on the hill that we've become. Well, George Washington's legacy impacted me personally by sort of drawing me to the craft. Interacting with folks at Mount Vernon, I got to know Washington very well at Mount Vernon. Mount Vernon, when in those days, it's a much bigger organization now. They have like 600 employees. When I worked there, there's 150 employees. And everything that we did was nickel and dime to death. Now, most people didn't know that. We put on a good show, but we did it on the cheap as best we could because we were trying to steward that money to get George Washington back into history books and get his picture hanging back in classrooms because he had been kind of forgotten. You know, the 60s and 70s were really bad for the Washington legacy, and it recovered a little bit during the 80s, but not to where every student knows who George Washington is, and that's a shame. American history must be taught in its complete story, which includes Washington being the first president all the way through the maybe darker corners of American history. So getting wrapped up in Washington, getting completely brainwashed in Washington, made it pretty easy when I decided to become a Mason to say, well, obviously I'm going to go to George Washington's lodge. And it was the relationships that I had built with the old guys driving their cars on the estate to lay wreaths that led to me finding AW as well. So I think Washington being a Mason is why I'm a Mason, but not because I'm a Washington nut. It's just I was working for him and got completely brainwashed. So, but you know, I'm glad that connection was there. I'm glad to have that deeper understanding of Washington because I think many of our members don't have a deeper understanding of Washington. And you know, it's one thing to tout his name and say we're the Lodge of Washington. It's quite another to know who Washington was, and it, you know, it's impossible to know him because we don't get to spend time with him as a living man, but spending time in his home, holding his possessions, getting to know everything that was important to him when he was at Mount Vernon really gave me an understanding of what kind of man he was. And I, you know, just grew to appreciate him even greater. And the Masonic part was something I could emulate easily. Well, I mean, there are many unique aspects to AW22. Which one is my favorite? You know, it doesn't hurt that we have a really nice building to meet in. It's, you know, going back to a previous statement on high church and low church, AW22 is high church for a number of reasons, chief among them being the cathedral in which we meet. So, you know, it's nice to have that sort of special place to go to, and when people walk into our meeting room, they're kind of awed. And it's not because it's grandiose. Our lodge room is not grandiose. It is very simple, but its context is grandiose. And so, I mean, I kind of like that. Outside of that, you know, it's nice to go to a lodge meeting, and I've been to lodge meetings up and down the East Coast. I've not gone anywhere out west yet, but I've met Masons from out west, and anytime that you say, I'm a member of AW22, people know who you are. And that is, it's a responsibility, and it's sort of a burden in that point. Like, we have to exude some level of Masonic professionalism or Masonic maturity anytime someone recognizes us as AW22. But it's also kind of awesome that your little lodge, where, you know, you learn the same stuff that every Mason learns, we're looked to from time to time, or we're at least referred to from time to time as being this place where Masonry lives. And that's kind of a special aspect about AW22. Well, you know, we preach a lot of different things in Masonry, and so my most favorite memory of my Masonic journey has been helping an older Mason sort of get beyond his personal prejudices to actually subdue his passions. And when he was able to listen, to get to know someone, develop a relationship, we, at another lodge that I'm a member of, we ran into an occasion where an Iranian-born gentleman was joining, and there was an older member who was very uncertain about him. Now, everyone was an American citizen here. Everybody was like completely normal. I mean, we all knew each other. We had been drinking together for, you know, not that we drink, but occasionally the Lodge of Refreshment's a great place to get to know people. And so we had been getting to know this brother for a very long time, and simply because of his ethnic background, this one member really had a problem with him becoming a Mason. We were able to get through the vote. He was able to set aside his prejudices enough to not blackball him. And a year later, we were at Grand Lodge, and it was just a small group that had gone down to Grand Lodge from that particular lodge, and we were sitting at dinner, and it was circumstance. I don't know how they ended up sitting next to each other at dinner, but a 20-something, very energetic and intelligent Iranian-born soccer player is sitting next to an 80-something, I don't really know what he did for a living, but retiree, and by the end of the dinner, they're sitting there and they're laughing together and having a good time, and had kind of forgotten that everybody else was in the group. They were just getting to know each other and to enjoy each other's company as brothers. And to me, that's what we're supposed to be doing. That's the barriers we're supposed to be breaking down. And you know, we still have work to do similar to that here in AW, and helping some of our members find further enlightenment and get over their prejudices and grow into the Masons that we think they have the potential to become. And having seen it actually happen, I know it can happen, and that's one of my favorite Masonic memories. My favorite degree is the Fellowcrafts degree, because I'm a nerd and it's all about education. I love so many aspects of it. First off, I love that they accomplish so many things in the shortest degree. It's the shortest degree, but yet we cover so much ground in that degree. I think that it's the first obligation that you give where you truly start to have responsibility for your fellow Masons, and so it's your first obligation to be part of a community. But then the second section, where you're climbing the winding staircase, and the winding staircase lecture is, I think, transformational for a lot of people. Education doesn't happen in the classic form anymore, so to take a new Mason and carry him through the 5 orders of architecture and help people, you know, it's that point where a Mason can start looking around and say, oh, I recognize that column is a whatever. That's an interesting thing that I think occurs because of the Fellowcrafts lecture. But then you get to those last 7 steps and you cover the trivium and the quadrivium, and people just haven't been exposed to education in that format. Our schools don't work that way as much anymore, especially our public universities. You get immediately hauled into a certain type of learning. Liberal arts colleges are a little bit better, you would think, since those are the 7 liberal arts and sciences, that they would be good at that. So, I think that people aren't educated that way anymore, and it helps provide a context for how to interact with the world and better understand the world around you. So I think that the Fellowcrafts degree it's beautiful, and it's that chance to grow as a person, and it's the map to grow as a person, to always be seeking greater knowledge and to keep climbing the stairs. You never get to the top of the stairs. So, it's an important thing for Masons to go through. And I think it's important that our mentors and lecturers do their best with the fellow crest degree because of its significance. If I had to pick a favorite part of ritual for me, a favorite part of what goes on in a lodge, having been a master now, I can say it is pretty awesome to go through Masonic introductions. The member suffers terribly because it goes on for hours and everybody has to be clapped for and everybody has to be stood up for. But the pomp and circumstance of the Masonic introduction is one of my favorite things that we do because it's that old ceremonial concept that sort of keeps the feeling that deep down we all kind of want to be royalty still. So it gives us that 3-second experience of being the most important person in the room. And it's also nice when you're sitting in the East to be able to make someone feel important by introducing them and bringing them through grand honors and the whole introduction process. So for everyone that gets exasperated with Masonic introductions, they're actually kind of awesome. You just gotta get into a position where you get introduced. Well, I think the future of Masonry, if it's to survive, is to actually return to its roots. Our Masonic lodges should be mirrors for the communities in which we live. The future of Masonry, if it's to survive, must make sure that its lodges are full of the same people that live in the communities that it should be serving. Our lodge members should be out in that community and serve that community. It's not about just coming to a lodge meeting all the time. Masonry is a very personal experience, and I'm not certain that lodges necessarily need to be sponsoring, I don't know, Habitat for Humanity build days or working at food drives, but I don't think that they shouldn't be doing that either. I hope that in our Masonic lodges, we're teaching people to want to go out and be a part of their communities, but I think if Masonry is truly to survive, moving into the future, it's going to have to get back to that focus. We've allowed ourselves over the years to be insular in our walls and not be as active in our communities as we should be. So I think the future of Masonry will include a lot more technology, as we've learned during COVID that we can actually do some things that are Masonic over technology. I hope that it includes a lot more youth finding us. I think there has been a shift in the past 15, 20 years, millennials that were, if I can use the word, unchurched with their parents because their parents sort of reacted against their parents before them, forcing them into church every Sunday. And, you know, Masonry provides sort of the structure that a church might have provided to a previous generation when it comes to having a place to go to where you have a network of people that will help take care of you if necessary. It provides a place for reflection. And, you know, we are not a religion, but we are religious, and it is a place to commune with whoever your supreme architect is. So I hope that the future of Masonry leverages both the community and aspects of society that maybe aren't available like they used to be for previous generations, but have always remained existent in the Masonic Lodge. And AW22's future is, I hope, moving more into the realm of kind of what Callahan experienced when he was writing a book about Washington and selling it to raise money to build the memorial. We were the de facto place to go to for information on George Washington. And I don't think that we're ever going to be that space. I think that belongs to Mount Vernon. It should belong to Mount Vernon. There are scholars there that studied Washington day in and day out. But AW22 could become a place to turn to for information on Washington as a Mason, and we need to beef up our skills if we're going to be able to rise to that challenge. But I hope in general that AW and the beauty that and messages and morals that can come from our ritual are best conveyed when you do the ritual well. So I hope that we can send that lesson out into our counterparts around the world, and AW's got the platform to do that. So it's about using it. And I think moving forward, now that we have the foundation, that we can really start influencing museum exhibits and educational practices. And we're going to have a platform to both raise money and invest money for that purpose. So it's not about just focusing on the Alexandria community, although that's exactly what we should continue to do. It's also now expanding that community on a more global scale. Well, I've been a Mason for 14 years now, and I think if I've learned any lessons, well, I think I've learned two lessons that completely contradict each other. First, if we are to learn anything from our ritual, it's that our first responsibility is to listen and to hear and to try and understand a new perspective before we debate it. And we live in a society where that's not necessarily the norm. Masonry is teaching a very old idea of wait, listen, stop. Don't let your thoughts run, just listen. Hear what the other person has to say. Let it set in for a minute, contemplate it, and then respond to it. So I hope that I've lived that lesson, because I think it's one of the most important lessons that we teach. Simultaneously, I think I have learned that we are truly all on the level, and it doesn't matter what position you're in, what grand line you belong in, what appendant bodies you're a master of. The new Mason that's walked in the door, his opinion is as valid and as important to what we do as the old Mason is. But it again comes down to listening and perspective, where the new kid should feel free to voice his opinion, but he also needs to sit and listen to the opinions of those that have come before him. And somewhere in the middle is the truth that we need to work towards. We're never going to innovate in our ritual, but we're going to have to innovate as an organization, and those new ideas come from our new members, regardless of how old they are. And I think a new Mason is a baby, either way you look at it. But for the new members that are coming in, you've gone through all the degrees just like all the rest of us, and you should be participating just like all the rest of us, and you pay dues just like the rest of us. So get in there, get your hands dirty, ask questions, try and be a part of things, and realize there's not always something for you to do outside of coming to meetings regularly and mentoring other Masons, and maybe that's the most important thing that you can do.